The Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security says federal law enforcement was ill-prepared ahead of unrest that swept the U.S. last summer. On Wednesday, Inspector General Joseph Cuffari released a report that found agents deployed to quell the violence in Portland did not have a coordinated strategy. The document details breakdowns in the response there. There was more than $2 million in damages to federal property in the city. The Inspector General told a House panel earlier that he's pursuing more investigations and that the federal government could continue to face challenges in times of civil unrest.
Since I was confirmed, I've published 5 reports that include oversight of the Secret Service. I just released one today. It's the DHS deployment of law enforcement personnel to Portland, Oregon, and I have 4 ongoing projects specifically looking at the Secret Service.
CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge joins me now. Catherine, thank you so much for being here. What did the Inspector General say about the federal response deployed in Portland last summer?
Well, Caitlin, the Inspector General for Homeland Security looked at the deployment of nearly 800 federal officers, and they came from several branches of Homeland Security, so Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Federal Protective Service, as well as the Secret Service. And what it found was that in many cases, these officers and agents did not have the necessary training to protect themselves as well as those who were demonstrating on the West Coast. And they didn't have sufficient equipment that they needed to protect themselves, such as shin guards, face masks. And the reason all of this matters is it created unnecessary risk, both for the federal officers who were deployed there, as well as the people who were demonstrating, and in some cases rioting. Caitlin.
Well, the Inspector General opted to investigate the response to Portland, but we also know that he has blocked or had blocked 2 other investigations.
Correct.
These incidents were related to Secret Service conduct leading into the 2020 election. So can you walk us through what were those issues?
We'll take them one at a time. The first was the use of the Secret Service to forcibly clear demonstrators from Lafayette Square. That is the square in front of the White House in the summer of 2020. And based on my 20 years of experience covering Homeland Security here in Washington, this is the poster child for the kind of investigation you would want the Inspector General to take on, because it's so politically charged. The Inspector General did not look at the issues surrounding the decision to clear the square, which ultimately led up to a photo op by then President Trump in front of the church holding the Bible. So it may be at the end of the day that we don't have a lot of ground truth on the facts. The Trump administration said they made a decision the night before to expand the perimeter around the White House, and that it was a coincidence that it was cleared before the president was there in front of the church. You see it right there. Though critics say that that is beyond reasonable in this circumstance, and they want to know if there was a directive by the Attorney General and other law enforcement to take an extraordinary move in order to facilitate that photo op for then President Trump. And finally, sorry, one other one. There's so much to say here. So the other one is the way in which the Secret Service was following their protocols for COVID-19 in the period leading up to the November election. Specifically, the coverage they were providing to then President Trump, the Vice President, and others at events that critics have said resulted in super spreader events, and whether the Secret Service was following all the necessary protocols in order to accommodate the campaign schedule.
And Catherine, it's interesting that you say that this is a case that the Inspector General would normally take up. So what justification was given, do you know, for not reviewing those incidents?
Well, based on the documents that we reviewed here at CBS News and my experience here in Washington, one of the classic explanations is that there are finite resources for these internal watchdogs, and they have to really pick and choose what they examine, because in some cases the issues could be handled internally by the agency involved. But I would argue that these issues, perhaps more than others, because of the politically charged nature of the issue and the divide in terms of the left and the right on what they think happened, it would be really helpful and constructive for the Inspector General to have taken those up and lay out the facts and the ground truth of what happened. Finally, I would say we haven't heard from the Secret Service in an immediate way as to why these issues were not resolved by the Inspector General.
This is why we're so grateful to have your reporting on this. You know, a lot of news on the Inspector General front. Another Inspector General appeared before lawmakers on Wednesday. Let's listen to one exchange that Michael Bolton had with a member on the House Administration Committee.
Regarding the architect of the Capitol, is there regular intelligence sharing between the AOC's office and the U.S. Capitol Police?
I would not be aware of that, sir.
Okay. And has your office examined how well the U.S. Capitol Police coordinates with the architect of the Capitol in the Sergeant at Arms, or is that, again, beyond your review?
That would be beyond my review, sir.
So I really appreciate you coming in and having this hearing. But what I am walking away with is kind of a classic problem here of everyone and no one being in charge at the same time.
So the criticism seems to be here that nobody is really in charge when it comes to the response at the Capitol. So what did the Inspector General say about the changes moving forward to address this?
Well, Caitlin, the most important change that he's advocating for is really a culture change that would take the Capitol Police from what amounts to a police department and turn them into what they call a protective service. So this is a service where intelligence really is the tip of the spear in terms of determining the kind of security that they would have around the Capitol to make it a safe place for lawmakers and the public to visit. So what the Inspector General is advocating for is taking the intelligence piece out of the Capitol Police and stepping it up a notch to make it its own, almost like an independent bureau to examine the information. And he's also advocating the same step to elevate the training component. What we learned today is that about 250 vacancies exist in the Capitol Police. And the reason that matters is that it doesn't allow them to have a 4-shift structure, sort of a daytime, early morning, daytime, nighttime, and then the 4th shift would be a training shift, right? So they would not be at the Capitol campus. They would be elsewhere being trained in civil unrest, how to handle the riot gear, all of those things that were lacking on the day of January 6th. But the bigger issue, again, is an issue of the structures and the bureaucracy. There's something called, it's too long to get into probably right now, but there is something called the Capitol Police Board. This is a board involving the Sergeant at Arms in the House and the Senate. That's like the top law enforcement officer for those branches of government. And then something called the Capitol Architect, who's in charge of the grounds of the campus. And this has been in place since, wow, like the 1870s. And they all have voting rights on it, but not the Capitol Police Chief. And he needs, in this case, he or she needs their sign-off to bring in the guards. So you can see this idea of there are a lot of people in charge, but really not one person is in charge. And that's a difficult situation under the best of circumstances. And it was an impossible and catastrophic decision in the days leading up to the riots.
Well, Catherine Herridge, a lot to keep following here on the policy front in the aftermath of that January 6th attack. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us.